All right. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight for our event, Remembering Cornell in Paint, virtual studio visit with Charles K. Steiner, class of 73. It'll be focusing on the lasting impact of Cornell on his painting. His work is included in a number of important corporate and public collections, such as the New York Health and Hospital Corporation in New York, 3M Corporation in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Brooklyn Art Library in Brooklyn, New York, and Emprise Bank in Wichita, Kansas, to name a few. He has had 9 solo shows, including the Performing Garage, New York, as part of a 10 one-person shows at Alternative Spaces under the umbrella of 10 Downtown, 1980, the Educational Testing Service, Princeton, New Jersey, and most recently at the Fort Smith Regional Airport in Arkansas, where 90,000 people passed through his exhibition. Early in his career, he held 2 residences at the Edward Albee Foundation in Montauk, New York. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight. Before I begin my presentation, I want to thank a few people because, as most of you know, who have struggled with Zoom and remote communication during the pandemic, it takes an army of people to make a successful Zoom presentation until you're very, very experienced, which I'm not. Therefore, I have enlisted my niece, who's currently a fellow at the Jewish Writers Initiative, and about to move to Los Angeles, California, Charlotte Steiner, to do all the camera work. And she's certainly done a yeoman's job, yeowoman's job during rehearsals. So I'm anticipating perfect camera work. I want to thank Jeff Schwartz for getting things underway for both Jennifer Saucier and myself. Jennifer did the last studio presentation. It was his idea, and he's a great promoter of both of our works, both Jennifer's and mine. I want to thank my wife, Mary Shepard, for her editorial input during the course of developing this program. And last but not least, the people who put in probably the most work, Kirsten Allman, who is the program manager for the Cornell Club in New York, and Craig Lessner and Tim Delapace, who are administrators for the club, for supporting this endeavor. So I'm appreciative to everybody, and I don't think we could have pulled this off without all the help from all 7 of those people. So that's quite an amazing, amazing group. So without further ado, I want to start with this painting here, which is a painting I did, an oil painting I did as a senior at Cornell University. It's approximately 8 feet long and 4 feet high. And it was done under the tutelage of Friedel Zubas, who lived between 1915 and 1995. Friedel was a 2nd-generation abstract expressionist. Abstract expressionism was an art movement that came to the United States in the 1940s and 50s. And there was a 2nd generation of painters who painted in that style that went into the 60s. And it is characterized by a certain spontaneity, broad brushstrokes. Ann Temkin of the Museum of Modern Art has said that it is really a reflection of self, of the artist's self. You don't monkey around with things like perspective or chiaroscuro. You paint directly onto the canvas. It is also characterized by more unconventional art materials. The most obvious one is that you may have already heard of is that Jackson Pollock used house paint. And I recently read something about Friedel using bed sheets to paint on. So don't be surprised as we go through this presentation if you see me painting on something other than stretched canvas. The other thing I just want to point out is the marks on the painting, the sort of freestyle marks. They're almost like unconscious mark making. And the reason that that is important is because the next painting I want to talk about, I want to skip to the beginning of 2016. A majority of this program will be dedicated to my last 5 years of work. I did this painting in 2016, remembering or memorializing a work experience I had in Switzerland the year after I graduated from Cornell. I was taking care 24/7 of 4 intellectually disabled 17-year-old boys. It is called Sangbash, which is incorrect translation of bloody cow. If you want to speak proper French, it would be sang de vache. And one of my two, I had two, out of the four young men that I cared for, I had two named Philippe. And Philippe number one was the one that would swear at me with Sangbash. He really thought that he was shocking me by continually saying this whenever he got frustrated with something I asked him to do, like make his bed or wash his face or brush his teeth or whatever it might have been. The other Philippe, however, contributed something to my insight on painting, and that is that he would get notes from his single mother. This was a residential school, so he was living apart from his mother, and it was a very 24/7 school. Visits home were very minimal and were governed by our almost ruthless house mother. And so Philippe number two's mother couldn't see him as much as she would have liked. So she would write him notes, and Philippe would write back to her on the note. But Philippe was quite intellectually disabled and was unable to write in proper French or to write even proper letters, A, B, C, or whatever. And so I came to a great insight watching Philippe write to his mother, because it reminded me of what Friedel would tell us to do with writing. Friedel would always say, you know, do more writing on your canvas. At least that's what he would say to me. And I did it, but I didn't really understand the sort of unconscious aspect of it until I worked in Switzerland the following year. And so I did in 2016, after thinking about it for decades, several paintings in honor of Philippe's writing. And this is the one that I like the best. And because it also includes certain other elements of abstract expressionism, such as the drips. Does anybody have any questions so far about abstract expressionism or anything that I have said?
I have a question.
Yes.
Oh, hi. Could you talk a little bit more? Those paintings look fantastic. They look really great. I haven't seen them in a really long time. And I don't even know if I've seen the one with the writing before, but could you talk a little bit more about Friedel Zubas and your art training at Cornell?
Sure. Cornell, when I was there, and the questioner, Jennifer Saussure, she was also there, as were several other people who were watching this film, modeled its curriculum after the Bauhaus curriculum. That is, there were the first one, they saw art training in terms of 4 years. And the first 2 years were what they call foundation courses. And it didn't really matter whether you were going to be a printmaker when you grew up, or a sculptor, or a painter, or something completely different. Everybody took the same courses. So as freshmen, we took drawing, we took a painting class, we took a sculpture class. In the second year, we took printmaking, and we took more drawing, and everybody took the same thing. And you didn't get into your specialization really until you were juniors and seniors. And then it was sort of more like a seminar, where sometimes, I guess when we were juniors, there might be a setup of, I don't know, a still life or a model. But generally, we had a lot of freedom to pursue our media as we wanted to. And Friedel was not involved or present really at Cornell, to my knowledge, during my first 2 years there. But he certainly was there the last year. And I think he might have been there for a semester when I was a junior. So he conducted his classes in a much more freestyle way. We were responsible for coming to class, and we were responsible for getting to work and conceiving of our paintings. The other thing that I think is important about Cornell is that all the faculty had studios in the building, so that they were role models for us in terms of artists. In other words, artists went to work. They came in the morning, they went into their studio, they did their painting or they did their sculpture. They took a break and came in class. Yes, sir, Wayne.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Nancy just walked in, so I was explaining you were on. I apologize.
It's all right. It's all right. It's all
I'll
right.
mute it. I'll mute it.
He's looking for a donation for you for our 50th reunion.
Yeah, all those paintings look great. I'll take it.
Thank you. But I do think it's important. I mean, you know, one knows that a lawyer goes to work and goes to court. I don't think that art students necessarily realize that art is a job. And I think that was a really significant message that all of us got at Cornell, and I think at many other art schools as well. I would also say that the foundation thing, the modeling after the Bauhaus, is not just true of Cornell. I recently taught adjunct at the University of Arkansas in Fort Smith, and they also had a foundation curriculum, and you had to submit a portfolio at the end of taking your 5 or 7 foundation courses. And if you didn't pass portfolio, you couldn't become a junior or senior art major. So you had to accomplish a certain number of skills. Does that just adequately describe things, Jennifer, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I remember Frida always saying, it's a job and I go to my job every day.
Right. Unfortunately, you don't get paid every day for your job.
Well, that's a minor or whatever.
If I remember, you were
Details.
you were attracted to Cornell by the quality of its government department, if I remember correctly.
That's a reference to my late father, who, in terms of guiding my college application process, evaluated all colleges and universities that I might be interested in terms of the quality of the government department, because he was a political scientist, really having nothing to do with the art department. So Jeff is correct on that. Are we ready for the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Sorry, start the PowerPoint? No.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's my website there at the bottom, Charles King Steiner, by the way, if you want to go to it after the program or if you have questions. Well, there we are. All right. One of the points that I neglected to make in my introduction is that you could paint in an abstract expressionist style and still paint representationally. Willem de Kooning is a very good example of a famous so-called abstract expressionist who, as many of you know, painted women and has quite a reputation for the way that he painted them in an abstract way. His women do not look like he painted them in a photorealist style. His work is characterized by broad brushstrokes, spontaneity, etc. In my case, the painting to the right is a gardenscape I did in 2005, and a series of gardenscapes, because I then lived in Wichita, Kansas, and we had the most dramatic garden in the back. And you can see that, yes, you know that it's a gardenscape. You can see a tree or 2 trees, and you know they're plants, but there's a lot, what's really going on there is a lot of brushwork and a lot of spontaneity. And if you compare that to the painting on the left, remember I said that artists used unconventional art materials and so forth. Painting on the left is a painting I did in 2007, excuse me, after our family cottage burned to the ground. And it was quite traumatic for my family, especially my wife's family, because they had gone there since early 1930s, late 1920s, 1927, I've just been told. So what I did for that one to sort of get started was I burned canvas and I applied it to a regular canvas so that the white and sort of blackish pieces that have black triangles on them are actually burned canvas, which is, again, not a conventional material and probably not something that during our foundation courses we would have been allowed to use. Next slide.
these are large canvases.
Yes, there are 56 by 66, those two. In about 2014 or 2015, my mother, who lived in suburban Washington and who was a widow and who was blind, began to be quite ill and really started on a path that would eventually kill her. And I was called upon to commute from where I was living in Arkansas to suburban Washington sporadically and sometimes with little notice, and to stay for periods of time, depending on what her needs were, to share the responsibilities with my brother and sister, who at that point had very demanding full-time jobs. So in order to keep my practice going with that kind of a schedule, I would do drawings of my fellow airplane passengers in the airports where I was waiting for planes. And then I would translate those drawings to paintings during my intermittent visits home. And I should just say my brother and sister put in much more time than I did caring for her, but because they had jobs that had definite schedules and I was an adjunct faculty member, I had more flexibility and therefore could be called upon to come, especially during times when they couldn't. This is airport study number 2. The drawings on the left and the paintings on the right. And people who sit in airports move around a lot. They don't sit like artist models in freshman and sophomore art school. They move around, they have drinks, they play cards, they discipline their children, they move their legs, they get up to check their plane, they sit down again, they talk to their boyfriend or girlfriend, they nudge the person behind them, they move their suitcases. So really the only drawings that could be done were gesture drawings. And so that lent itself really to the expressionist style in which I was painting anyway. Next slide.
These are very evocative of the ennui that one, suffers at an airport.
Well, good. Then there was this is another drawing or gesture drawing. And then the painting that I did modeled after it. Next slide is this one. And again, I think you can begin to see that one of the narratives of my work, despite the expressionist style that dominates the technique, is disability. I do not self-identify as disabled myself, but I supported myself as a working artist from just out of college, taking care of disabled people. I've had several relatives and friends who were disabled physically, intellectually, and so forth. And as I just mentioned, my late mother, was blind for at least the last 10 to 15 years of her life. So it was always something in the forefront of my mind. You can also, I don't know if everybody can see Jeff Schwartz, but there is another airport study right behind him that I did in this series as well, of people standing waiting to get their tickets.
My 25th birthday present from last year.
Next, please. This is a very popular painting. It's airport study number 10. My wife especially likes the banana. The brushes, the brushwork. She thinks that it really is evocative of someone peeling a banana. A lot of people like it because it has a real shoe attached to it. The guy's who's crossing his leg, that's a real shoe.
Oh, really?
Real blue jeans and a belt. Again, unconventional assemblage materials. And that's one of the 5 paintings had the exhibition that Kirsten referenced, 2018 to 2019, was of 6 of these paintings, of which that was one. And 90,000 people passed through that show because the 6 paintings were on either side of the hallway to security. So if you wanted to get on your airplane, you had to walk through my exhibition. That's, in a way, many more people than might have seen these paintings if it was in a gallery, or if they were in a gallery or a museum. So fellow artists, you should not discount alternative spaces like an airport to show your work. You get a lot of exposure with a place like an airport. You can also, with this painting, just going back a little bit to a formalistic detail, see the brushwork in the background, again, sort of emulating the writing that we've been talking about, the mark making that Friedel liked. Next slide. Here's an exhibition. Here's a photograph of the exhibition, 3 on the left side and 3 on the right side. My wife likes to point out that in true Southern style, this airport in Fort Smith did not have plastic chairs, but they had winged armchairs. And one of our friends said that it reminded her of a nursing home rather than an airport. But you were always very comfortable when you sat there. As you can see, the woman below the painting also was very comfortable. And in fact, one of my colleagues at the University of Arkansas, Fort Smith, during the exhibition, made it a point to go to the airport several times and take pictures of people, sort of schlumpy looking people sitting under the paintings, and drawing analogies between the people sitting under the paintings and the paintings themselves. I don't know whatever happened to his study. Next. My mother passed away in 2016, and I did continue to use the sketches. I did continue to come in to suburban Washington to help my brother and sister with her estate and empty my mother's house and so forth. And amongst the things that were in her house were her Braille. She had taught herself, not taught herself, she had been taught Braille in the closing years of her life. So she had a Braille typewriter, she had Braille books, she had pages of Braille here and there. And I got interested in the Braille, not so much to learn it myself, but I was interested in the raised dots and the potential for their patterns. So I started experimenting, sort of reaching for something to do besides airport passengers with the Braille dots. And I was going to do very large, this is an example, the one on the left is an example of a simple Braille painting I did. And it says, disabled lives matter. And I did 3 or 4 of those. And the scale of that painting being whatever it is, 12 by 16, has Braille that's just a little bit larger than that you see on elevator buttons and in restrooms and so forth. But my paintings, as you can see, are huge. I mean, larger, they're not huge, but they're much bigger, and they would have been, and the Braille, if I had used them on the small scale, would have been dwarfed. So I had to find some way of making standardized dots and standardized spacing that corresponded to Braille letters. Next slide. I think we have another one of the disabled lives matter painting. Okay, the next slide again. So what I happened upon was a Walmart bath mat. And I used the Walmart bath mat as a stencil to make Braille letters. I could cut out sort of rectangles, have sort of 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 rows of holes and fill them with paint or mixed paint with a medium to make it thicker, and make various Braille letters. Next slide. The problem was, just at that point, when I sort of had happened upon my discovery of bath mats, COVID was beginning to raise its ugly head, and people were afraid, as they should be, to touch things that other people had touched. So I started just playing with the bath mats to see what artistic potential I could use them for. And you can see I used both the bath mats themselves in a positive way, and I went and used the bath mats as a stencil for dots, as you can see inside the figures. This is a transition piece because the painting, the figures are based on sketches of airport passengers. But at that point, I was less concerned about making paintings with recognizable figures than I was in experimenting with the mileage I could get out of these this funny bath mat material. Each bath mat cost $3, by the way. So I bought about a dozen of them, so I had to use them. Next. So slowly over the last 2 years,
Brilliant.
I've
By the way,
evolved.
Charlie, that is brilliant.
Thank you. I have evolved into painting abstractly. I've continued to use the bath mats as a stencil for dots. I've also tried to stretch my skills, my technique by using other materials. After I left Cornell, I had moved into a small apartment shared with Jeff Schwartz, who's in the audience tonight. And oil paint really is not good in a small apartment because it smells. so I had switched to acrylics. But when I started experimenting with these dots, I started painting outside. So I started using oil paint, oil enamels. I started painting on panel, because one of the nice things about Braille is the dots are raised. And I wanted to keep that quality in the painting. And if you put paint down on canvas, it gets absorbed either entirely or partially. Whereas if you put it down on a wood surface, especially one that's been treated, the paint sits on top of the wood. So this is an example of one of the paintings, and I called the series Graffiti, because at that point I really was desperate to escape the figurative airport passenger scene. I was experimenting, and I was using panels, and I just figured COVID was going on. I figured I wasn't going to have any exhibitions or a chance to show my work anyway. So I was just concentrating on the visual work itself. So anyway, this is an example, and I'll show you one more before we're done. And the detail on the right gives you a little bit closer look at the painting.
It's funny how you go from one thing leads you to the next in your creative process.
Yes. Why is that funny? Isn't that logical though?
Yeah.
Sure. Like Jennifer and the maps, and and the way she did her maps and her I'll say birthday cake. You know, with the different layers on her stuff.
Right.
And the way you guys evolve, the way you evolve your oeuvre, is that the right word?
Well, I think people, if you read a lot and you follow an author, sometimes authors work in a sequential or logical way. And I don't think it's any different really than for artists, for visual artists.
Yeah, but I guess because you could see your thinking as it morphs from one.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah,
It's
interesting.
I'm envious.
It's a good observation.
It is a good observation. Next slide. Before I talk about this painting, I want to acknowledge the fact that this is supposed to be a virtual studio visit, and that I'm showing this work on my porch. For those of you who don't know me well, I've just relocated with my wife to suburban Maryland. And I wanted to use this porch for a couple of reasons. One is the shape of my studio that I moved into. So I'm going to show you a picture of it. Next.
Nice.
It's crowded, folks. That painting rack is 24 feet long and dominates the space. I'm in the process of trying to negotiate with my brother to help me move a shelf, which will give me a little more room to paint. But that is one reason why I didn't want to do the virtual visit there. The other is I needed enough room to show Untitled, which is 8 feet wide. And one of the disadvantages of painting large is that it limits you in the space where you can show such paintings. So this is a virtual studio visit. That's just not in the studio. All right, in conclusion, let's go back to this painting.
I wasn't sure if I could be heard.
Oh, I'm sorry, let's switch out of PowerPoint.
We're out.
Okay, we're out. Right.
Okay.
This is not the last painting I've done, but one of my more recent paintings. I call it Graffiti 4, but really because my wife is a medieval art historian, I call it Gothic Arches. But I think it represents, in a lot of ways, a summary of the abstract expressionist heritage and the dots and the sort of disability narrative that I've been talking about during the last half an hour or so. There is poured paint, drips a la Jackson Pollock. This is a piece of assemblage. I did not make this lovely trapezoidal frame. I found it, but it reminded me of a window. And the accidental aspect of the way that the poured paint worked gave us sort of Gothic looking arches, which is why I call it Gothic Arches. It is also a combination of oil paint and acrylic. The oil is the silver, and the acrylic is the red and the blue. And the stains, of course, oil-based as well. I want to sort of ask for comments and want to make sure that everybody understands and that I acknowledge whatever questions you might have about the things that I've been saying this evening. Are there any questions or comments that or additions that people would want to make at this point?
Yeah, and again, you're welcome to either just unmute your microphone and just speak, or you can type into the chat.
I have a question for Charlie.
Yeah.
I was in that foundation class with him. And then I went into
Then you became a doctor.
well, whatever. So Charlie, what's fascinating to me is sort of your embrace of sort of materiality now, with thingness, the mats and the wood, and how that's, I mean, I'd like to hear, but it seems to me that that's expressing some of the gesture as much as the paint once did.
I think you're absolutely right, but I don't think that would have been acceptable in drawing class, for example, where we were drawing the nude figure in freshman and sophomore year, or even in sculpture. I mean, in the sculpture, we experimented with different materials, but they were very sort of conventional materials and traditional in the development of sculptors. So this is sort of new territory, at least for me.
Perhaps it was a rebellion against your Cornell education, but I seem to recall some early work that was done on crates.
Right.
That's true.
And so could you reflect on how that connects to what you're doing now?
That's my sister, and she's correct. After I came back from
I forgot about that.
Switzerland and then went to graduate school at George Washington University, I moved to New York and shared an apartment with Jeff Schwartz. It was a small 2-bedroom apartment, and I slept in, my studio was in my bedroom. I didn't have a lot of space, and I was making $7,500 a year as a fellow at the Metropolitan Museum, which had a lot of prestige and, really spiraled my career subsequently, but it left me with very little money for art supplies and so forth. And I would walk around New York and find fruit crates on the curbs in front of the Korean grocery stores and so forth. And so I thought, well, maybe they could lend themselves to being small paintings. So I did a number of experiments with those fruit crates, painting them, adding texture and so forth. And they are, I think, on my website, charleskingsteiner.com, and my public Facebook page, if anybody's interested. And I guess they would also feed into what Dr. Pressman talked about in terms of a directness with the material. Makes my work even look more consistent than I thought.
Well, it's all on wood. Those are hard surfaces. They're not canvas.
Right.
Some of them, if memory serves, were almost creche-like, right? You had stuff. The technical.
Yeah, I had steel wool on them. I had stuff hanging from them, and I painted them. I painted patterns on them. I did a lot of experiments with them.
They were very popular with Metropolitan Museum of Art docents.
Jeff, I'm very popular. I was very popular anyway in those days.
Many a Park Avenue apartment in New York had those proudly hanging on the wall.
I had a very loyal group of volunteers when I worked for the Metropolitan Museum, and I'm very grateful for their interest in my art as well as my professional career in starting disabled visitor services at the Met. Yes.
I mean, because they were quality.
Yeah. Any other comments? Well, folks, thank you very, very much for taking the time out during your dinner hour to share your views about my work. And I look forward to seeing you all in the near future. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to either go to my website, charleskingsteiner.com, or to email me at ckingsteiner@gmail.
I know that Wayne has space on his wall behind him. Perfect for a very nice piece of art.
Or maybe several.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you,
Thank
Charlie.
you, Charlie.
Yeah,
Thank
but I
you.
guess
That was
before we
great.
go, we did have 2 comments from people in the chat. Wayne enjoyed the bath mat usage, thought that was brilliant. And Susan Murphy, who had to leave, loved to hear the description of your very interesting work. So yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Steiner, for giving such a great presentation. We all enjoyed, seeing your work and learning more about it. And yeah, I hope everyone
I would like to make one more comment.
Oh, yes.
Charlie, I really think that your progression of art production and the quality of your work has gotten better over the years. So the comment I'm making is, for goodness sakes, keep it up. Because you're actually getting better.
Thank you very much, Wayne. I appreciate that.
It's really a remarkable thing to see. And you see it in the work. So keep it up.
Thank you very much, Wayne.
Thank you. All right. Well, yeah, thank you everyone for attending again, and have a great evening.